The
howling winds of November are out there, or at least they were, although in some places they still are. The windy conditions will continue overnight in the Northeast, although they have eased in some areas or will ease off their highs. Snow and rain in the western U.S. We've got the weekend outlook, the long range, getting more interesting by the day. And where else can you find such incredible weather information nowhere else but on the Joe and Joe Weather Show, which is brought to you by the folks at Omni True Value Hardware at 1226 North Wellwood Avenue in West Babylon, New York, in southwest Suffolk County. And of course, getting closer to that first snow and ice event in the coastal Northeast. So make sure you got plenty of rock salt or any of the snow and ice melt products that Omni has, bag, ice pellets and flakes, Pelado, and of course, what's life without a beautiful 30-inch snowblower and other supplies to make sure your power is running? 631-756-1125. Nowhere can you find better prices. The website is
OmniTrueValue.com. And Joe, it was gloom and doom, but right now, the rain has been shut off for the last couple of hours. Not as windy as it was a little while ago. And for tonight's tree lighting at 30 Rockefeller Plaza, which is due at the overtly late night hour of 10 o'clock, it should really be at 5 or 6 o'clock in the evening. So there would be a larger viewing audience, but I'm sure the kids who look forward to this, many of whom will probably be already in bed. But by 10 o'clock tonight, I think skies will be at least partly cloudy to even clear. And the only thing against anyone who is out there awaiting the lighting of the tree tonight, I think, will be the fact that the chill factor will be a factor. Probably make it feel those winds in the 30s, maybe even with a stronger gust or two in the upper 20s. But the worst of it is over. It is behind us now, and it did leave behind a few downed trees and power lines. And most notably, I noticed that in Queens, there were a few trees that were downed, which is interesting to me because I don't think that they had a wind advisory up for the 5 boroughs. They had it up for Long Island, though.
Well, they had it up for Brooklyn and Queens.
They did have it up for Brooklyn and Queens, so there you go. But that's where all the damage was, at least from what I was able to see on the local newscasts. And we actually had a power outage up here in Putnam Valley for all of 1 minute. It came, everything went out. It came right back,
and it went.
And it went. So there you go.
Well, we had pouring rain here last night, all night. It was done by the time I got up this morning. But I occasionally woke up a couple of times to hear the bullets on the on the roof. I was told there were rumbles of thunder, although I did not hear those. And then we spent the morning in the low 60s. By the time we got to the mid and late afternoon, it was in the upper 30s. And that's kind of, well, we've dropped off from there too. I think it was down, last I looked, it was like 35 or 36. And of course, speaking of tree lighting, of course, we did the tree lighting here on the Joe and Joe Weather Show last Sunday at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. So we did it at a, how shall we say, more godly hour. For the folks and for our audience. Welcome tonight to the Joe and Joe Weather Show. Welcome to everybody on the chat board on this Wednesday night. And we've got, it's November. It's the last day of the month of November.
Yes.
And in my view, this month of November has behaved pretty much how most Novembers do, especially this latter part where we've been getting cold fronts coming through every couple of days, quick shots of air that take temperatures down, quick warm-ups that are just for the day that it winds up getting into some rain like we did today. And there's nothing unusual about this. Folks, there are some people already off the deep end because nothing has happened yet, and nothing usually does happen. 9 out of 10 times in the month of November, you don't see any snow. So accumulating snow along the coast. So this was again really typical. But I will say, I think where you've been going with your long range ideas. I think starting to kind of shape up there. The models seem to be listening to you, at least from what I saw today. I think we're going to go in the same in that sort of direction, and it's definitely getting blocky. That's one thing we will have. We're going to have a blocky pattern. It is going to turn colder. I think the question about whether there might be something down the road to look at ultimately I think is going to depend on what happens in the Pacific and how the Pacific part of this equation behaves. That I think is still a bit of an unknown. But if you're a winter weather lover or a snow lover, uh, you there are things to like about the way the upper air pattern is shaping up going into the next 2 to 3 weeks.
Yeah, as I said, I think it's going to take a little time. I think the building blocks are certainly there, and I use that literally and also figuratively because it will be a block, I think, and eventually by January, I think we're going to have a rather significant block occurring over either northern Canada or up toward Greenland. That's going to set the stage for a prolonged period of cold weather. I see January as a cold month. I see January as a month that may see more than a few Alberta clippers, and we were talking about this yesterday, that in recent years we haven't seen too many of those, but I do see a few coming on down and sweeping through here, not dropping a whole heck of a lot of snow. I don't foresee January to be one where we're going to see and again, I could be wrong, and the whole pattern
and
could change.
there's a high likelihood that you might be. Just bear that in mind anytime we pontificate about the long range, there's a high probability that there's something not going to be right about that. I'll just say this. I don't know. I didn't respond to it, but it's bothersome to me. Someone posted on my Facebook page, and they seem to be knowledgeable about weather. I don't know. I don't know who the person is personally, but he sort of made this unequivocal statement about the pattern and how it's set up. So no snow for the month of December, and he said this 3 days ago, and I started thinking, okay, you just basically made a 33-day forecast. You want to give yourself a little bit of room that maybe something might go wrong with your analysis. I don't know. I find that one just bugged me because it sort of went against the whole idea of what I was seeing going on with the pattern. Is there going to be something of size and of consequence? Who knows? I mean that's an ultra short range question.
Well, so this gentleman or woman or person said no snow for the entire month of December. Is that what?
Right. Correct.
Implying?
Nothing.
Well, yeah, it's not like it has never happened before. However, I am looking at the last 10, 11, 12, 13, the last 15 Decembers, and of the last 15 Decembers at Central Park, there have been only 1, 2. They've only been 2 out of the last 15 that did not have a single flake fall from the sky during December. All the other Decembers have had at least a trace. In 1 year, 2010, 2011, well, this is December of 2010, 20.1 inches of snow fell in the month of December. And most other years, it was more on the order of, 5, 6, 7 inches. So to say that with absolute certainty and surety that this is going to be one of those non-snow Decembers, well, you've only hit that twice in the last 15 years. Good luck.
The odds are against you because even in the crappiest of patterns, and sometimes in the month of December, a tiny window opens up in a terrible pattern that lasts for maybe a couple of days, and that's where we've seen it happen. I think even in that super El Nino year, or that super El Nino year, there was some snow, even though temperatures were way above normal. And last year, even with what happened on Christmas Eve, with the temperatures going up to 70, we did have accumulating snow in the month. I'm pretty sure about that. Yeah,
97, 97, 98, we had a trace of snow.
Oh, that was a terrible winter for snow. That was almost non-existent.
5.5 inches for the whole season.
Right,
and
that actually came on the day after the first day of spring. There was no snow, hardly anything measurable through the actual both the meteorological winter and the astronomical winter. There was nothing, and it happened on the day after. I think it was the day after the first day of spring, and it was very localized too. Unless you were in New York City and maybe a few miles surrounding New York City, you got some snow, and everybody else got nothing.
Right. 5 inches of snow in the month of March, and take away that 5 inches, and New York City for that entire season, the great El Nino year of 97, 98, would have had a grand total of a half an inch of snow. That was it.
Yeah, I was really rooting for that not to happen, because it would have been the all-time least snowiest winter on record. But in the meantime, here we go with the satellite tonight, and everything's moving right along. A lot of clouds have now swept offshore. It looks like there's this little back edge trough that's coming through too, and once that goes out, skies are going to clear out nicely. You can see the ton of moisture that's coming into the Pacific Northwest with the next round of energy. And we've got another weather system coming. This time, the next one's going to be in the eastern part of the U.S. on Saturday. Otherwise, much of the rest of the country is really not doing very much from the standpoint of weather tonight, adverse weather, I should say. And taking a look at the watches and warnings, we still have wind advisories up for northeastern Pennsylvania, for Sullivan County, and then northward through the rest of New York State, the upper Hudson Valley, Massachusetts, Vermont, New Hampshire, Maine, even some high wind warnings in coastal Maine. Lake effect snow warnings in north central New York, that's still in play. Winter weather advisories in southwestern New York, also still in play. Wind advisories in Michigan, with winter weather advisories and winter storm warnings in the northern part of the lower peninsula, and then also on the upper peninsula, we've got various winter weather advisories and winter storm warnings, and also storm warnings in Lake Superior. And then out west, Joe, a lot of winter storm warnings and winter weather advisories in Northern California, both on the elevated areas near the coast, as well as the Sierra Nevadas, and then on up through a good chunk of western Oregon under a winter storm warning. Advisories in parts of Washington State. Then you go back to warnings in northern and central Idaho, northwestern Montana, northwestern Wyoming. Got some action with wind and high wind warnings in southeast Colorado, also in southeastern Wyoming, and a various number of counties in both Colorado and in Utah showing up with winter storm watches. So a lot of activity on both coasts. The cold air is in the west with the by the way, we still have that winter storm warning up for the northern third of Alaska.
And Alaska has had well above normal conditions through much of the month of November. Our friend up in northern Alaska has even said that the waters that he overlooks are not even frozen yet. So I don't know what this means, down the road, whether or not an unusually mild month of November in Alaska has any repercussions on the rest of the continent in terms of how warm or how cold it's going to be. But it has been rather balmy up in the vast 49 state this particular month.
Well, Tony Gigi, where he is, he sent me So this is the ice, um, Arctic sea ice extent, and I believe the red line that you see is the uh, 2012, which holds the record for the least amount, and you see where it hit bottom there. But this year, which is in the blue, is running. It didn't bottom anywhere close to the 2012 low, and is running ahead of the 2012 refreeze through the through the middle part of November anyway. And I'm just looking here, the average, so they're still running a little bit below the long-term average. But yeah, I mean, it is taking it is taking its time getting back to where it should be. But it could be that the polar vortex is on the weak side up over the Arctic regions, and that cold air is getting displaced more to the south in Canada, where we see extensive snow cover across much of North America, especially in Canada. That could bode well for winter weather lovers. Doesn't always, but it can.
Now, this is the last day of November, and we have had here in New York City some rather interesting extremes that have taken place on this final day of November. For example, in 1898, and all of this is from Rob Friedowitz, who, as we have said many times before, is amazing in digging up or dredging up all of these interesting weather records. They're not just statistical records in the sense that you look at numbers like record high, record low, record wind, or whatever. I mean, he puts it into a little miniature story, a capsule summary. 1898, this was a Wednesday in that year of 1898, November 30th, just 3 days after a snowstorm dumped 10 inches of snow. A snowfall of 6 inches accumulated today, and 3 inches had fallen on November the 24th. So the 19 inches of snow that fell this month is the most on record for the month of November. 19 inches of snow, most of that falling in the final days of November in 1898. Then in 1929, the year of the Great Depression, or the year that the stock market collapsed, November 30th, 1929, a frigid high and low of 23 for a high, 12 degrees for a low, made this New York's coldest day in November in the 20th century based upon mean temperature. These temperatures would be well below average even in the dead of winter. So you say to yourself, well, then that means that the end of November usually tends to be cold and frigid and even snowy, right? How about 1991, which was a Saturday? They may have been all going to Jones Beach that day, Joe. Today's very balmy high of 70 degrees on the 30th of November 1991 was 21 degrees above average, a record for the date. This came a year and only a day after a record-tying high of 69. So you see it can go both ways. You can have on this date cold, snow, or balmy, almost summer-like temperatures, and that is what it can be like on the 30th of November. Today, we get well into the 50s, and we had a windy and rainy final day of the month.
Yeah, November's a volatile month. You know, it always is. November to me is comparable to March, just going in the other direction.
Right. Right,
And
we're heading. So we'll see as we move now into December what that bodes for us. Remember, last year we had almost from coast to coast, except for the far west, incredibly warm temperatures for December. Many places set record highs for December, and there was, of course, on the 10th or 11th of December that outbreak of severe weather with thunderstorms and tornadoes, especially in and around Kentucky. I said before we even got close to December, I said some weeks ago that in spite of the fact that this is the third consecutive La Nina winter, that I highly suspect that this year, December, the script is going to be a bit different than last year, at least. I don't think we're going to be seeing persistent record highs, and I don't think we're going to be seeing any significant outbreaks of convection, although last night and this morning in the deep south, not too far from where Mr. Cioffi is, there were, I think, something like 10 or 11 tornadoes that were recorded in the middle of the night. And that could be rather frightening, could it? Whether or not we see that in December, I really don't think we're going to see anything like what we had last year. But I do think we're going to see colder. I mean, they have to be colder. I mean, last year was like way up here in terms of record temperature. So it has to come down. It has to be lower than what it was last year. I think it might be a more than just a little lower, maybe significantly lower. And who knows? We may just see our first snowfall of the season, although that person on the chat board has already defined December as a snowless month coming up. We'll see about that.
Yeah. Anyhow, yeah, it wasn't on the chat. The one I spoke to was on my Facebook page. But no matter. I actually like when people post stuff like that because I'm a contrarian. So it immediately makes me want to take the other side of the equation. The other side of the bet. In the meantime,
and Mark Yachera also points out on the chat board, it's also the end of the hurricane season, and it was a memorable one when you take into account Ian and Nicole. So this is the end. I mean, not to necessarily say
and
that.
Also, let's not forget the one that went up, Fiona. Into Canada, into Nova Scotia, Newfoundland, and points north.
And that doesn't necessarily mean it's the end of the season, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we've seen the end of tropical activity because, it's been crazy. All of these storms have been coming pretty late in the season, so who knows? Maybe the tropics have one more to boil up between now and the end of the year.
Hopefully not. Yeah. In the meantime, snow-wise, for what's going on with this, there's going to be a little bit of backside snow and a little bit of lake effect. As we mentioned, those warnings up in north central New York. And you can see the area is small. We've got probably places like Tug Hill, for example, could wind up with a foot or a foot and a half. And you see the Weather Service markings there, a coating to an inch overnight in most of northern New Hampshire, northern parts of Maine. Then, of course, you've got more lake effect in southwest New York, just a few inches. Maybe the hot spots in southwest New York could get half a foot tops. Meanwhile, with what's going on up in the upper peninsula of Michigan, looking at a few inches there, more than a few inches up on the upper peninsula, where we've got some 8 and 9 numbers popping up on the eastern part of the UP. And then further west, we see with snow, and this is going to take us, by the way, to Saturday evening. So the next weather system that's going to be heading into the Rockies and Plains tomorrow and Friday, leaving maybe a few inches up in parts of North Dakota. And then you start to get into the big numbers as you go further west into Idaho and northwestern Montana, northwestern Wyoming. A lot of double-digit numbers here throughout much of Idaho as well. It's pretty sizable snowfall being indicated for most of the state. And we talked about the Cascades, big numbers from yesterday. So this is on top of whatever's fallen so far because there's more to come. And extending further south, some big numbers in the Sierra Nevadas going up and down interior California, and some big numbers up in northwestern California. Again, in the elevated areas, generally above 2,000 feet, which is not that high for snow. Meanwhile, on the radar, the rain still raining in New England. With some moderate to heavy rain. We've got some downpour still going on in eastern Massachusetts, southeastern Massachusetts, up into Maine. There looks like there's a severe thunderstorm warning, actually, that's going on right now. I think it might be close to Portland there with what looks like a line of storms that is moving eastward. So, SPC did not have any thunderstorm activity at all north of North Carolina, so they kind of yesterday there were a few people that told me that they heard rumbles of thunder across parts of eastern Pennsylvania and also in a few other areas from eastern PA to southern New England. So maybe they should have had the general thunderstorm pushed all the way up, but certainly uh, they didn't have certainly any kind of marginal risk or anything like that. I don't know if that would have been warranted because we're talking about one severe thunderstorm warning here. The southeast and the southern and the deep south, all nice and quiet after yesterday's rough weather that moved through the central Gulf states and the lower Mississippi Valley. So they're quiet. But meanwhile, you see the moisture that's coming into the Pacific Northwest continues, and the snow that's going on in eastern Washington and over parts of Idaho, Montana now starting to move up into Wyoming. WPC was having some problems today. So the snow map wasn't working right. But I'm going to see if it is. So here's the liquid precip for the next 7 days. Looks like another quarter to a half an inch probable perhaps on Saturday, a little bit less south and west of New York City. Still showing some hefty amounts in the Tennessee Valley and not too far from me, up to several inches of rain in the next 7 days. And out in the west, particularly in the Sierra Nevadas, that's all snow. 3, 4, 5 inches of liquid. So we're talking 3 or 4 or 5 feet of snow in some places there. Comparable, I guess, to what happened in western New York not too long ago. Let me see if I can get the snow map up because, as I said, it wasn't working.
And just getting back to
here it is. It's working again.
Just getting back to SPC not putting thunderstorms in the forecast for the Northeast, I did notice, Joe, late yesterday or last night, the HRRR had that very thin line of convection that moved through Pennsylvania, through the tri-state, and into New England. And I looked at that and I said, well, gee, that doesn't seem to make any sense because, again, the folks who are in the know about, possible severe weather or thunderstorms, SPC didn't have anything mentioned. And the interesting thing also is that the NAM, the NGM,
I know
the NAM had lifted indices of around +5, and usually when you see that, even in a dynamic situation, you say, well, will they not? Will we see any kind of convective activity? And I would have tossed a coin and said, all right, I say we're not going to have any because it's so marginal. You would have liked to have seen the lifted indices closer to zero or even in below zero, like -2 or -4. But yeah, so if you did see or see a flash of lightning or hear a rumble of thunder, congratulations, because that really and let's give credit to the HRRR because they certainly showed it with that very narrow, snaky line that was moving through. It was the backside, so to speak, the back end of the precipitation as it was coming to an end. They suggested that we might see a little bit of rumble here and there. But any case, it's over now, and we move forward.
Well, I was able to get the snow map up, the probability from WPC. This is the probability of at least 4. We've been working with 2 lately, but now we can graduate and work up to some higher numbers here. Actually, the map that's up on the screen is the probability of at least 2. Let's see what the 4 looks like. Yeah, I mean, it's pretty hefty here. Anything that looks remotely red is at least 80%. The darker red is between 95 and 100%, and you see it runs up and down the mountain chains in the west and also up in the northern Rockies. We can jump over, let's see, a probability of at least a foot. And here, too, we've got some fair areas here in California, in the Sierra Nevadas, and also up into northwestern California. More than 50% probability in some places of at least a foot. Also in central Idaho, there's a large area there, relatively large area of 95 to 100% probability of at least 12. And in northwestern Wyoming, should I do 18? Why not? Let's look at 18. And even 18, Joe, shows up with some high probabilities in the next 72 hours. So
I would have to guess that those areas that show that slight jog toward red for 18. Those are the places that probably have the highest elevations. I wouldn't even take a guess as to how high, 5, 6, 8,000 feet or something like that. That's where you'll find the 18. Kind of
Yeah.
makes you.
Oh,
Kind of makes you.
yeah. No question.
Kind of makes you think about when those occasions when we here at sea level in the Northeast get those whoppers of 12 and 18 inches. You think back to times like right now when we're talking about those kind of numbers confined mostly to the highest elevations out west.
Yeah. This is the long range, so we're looking here at Saturday into Sunday, and you see that the probabilities here in the long range of at least 3 are 50 to 70%, and even some areas in California 70 to 90% probability. Just widen out a little bit. Small areas there in western Colorado. In the east, small area up in the Adirondacks and in northern New Hampshire and Maine. 10 to 30% probability of at least 3. And then Monday, we're looking at nothing. This is Sunday into Monday. Monday into Tuesday, again, a few patches up in upstate New York and in northern New Hampshire. And Tuesday into Wednesday, you see some geography being covered again in upstate New York and in Vermont, New Hampshire, and in Maine. So, I always like to look at the WPC's long range out because sometimes, just like with some of the other products, you can get a hint of what they're thinking in terms of what models are doing by seeing where they put the probabilities, and then you can just sort of say, oh, okay, that looks more like the European versus the GFS, or vice versa. But nothing else major. I would just slide over to the west to see if there's anything going on. No, it gets pretty quiet out in the west, because by the time we get to the middle of next week, things are going to start shifting around. So there'll be a bit of a transition period, I think, in the overall pattern. So I'm, of course, rooting for the strong blocking signal to be strong, because being where I am in the south, the blockier it is, the better it is for me to see a little bit of the white stuff. And I did notice, Joe, on the Teleconnections from last night's 0Z run. All right, that's the wrong one. Just give me a moment here. Let's see, is it this one? Okay, I can get them off this page, so this is good enough. So this is the NAO, and it's actually on last night's run. The NAO is shown to be even stronger than what we saw yesterday. A stronger negative standard deviation here, not quite -2, but getting there, and it gets there in a hurry, because here we are sitting at neutral on December 1st, and probably by the 5th or so, it's already down to almost -2. And it stays negative throughout the first 15 days of the month of December. So that, and given what we've been seeing on the upper air, this block is going to happen. It's a matter of where it sets up and how strong is it going to be. The other thing we should watch for closely, watch this PNA. It's strongly negative right now. It's almost 2 standard deviations negative, and that's explaining what's going on in the West with that kind of setup in the Pacific North America index being as negative as it is. All the cold air is in the West, and we're seeing the storminess in the West too, with the snow. But that's going to climb up to be much less negative, and then toward the end of the period, it starts to make a run for the neutral line. So that is just something I think we need to pay attention to. And the other thing is, let's look at the Arctic oscillation, because when this is negative, this is usually a pretty good indicator of it getting cold, and it's negative. Wow. It's negative now, but it gets, we're talking almost 4 standard certainly 3 standard deviations negative, and a lot of members go down almost to 6 standard deviations. If that verifies, that's a very important cold signal, and couple that with the negative NAO, that is that's a signal for cold air in the eastern part of the United States.
What was it? It was 2 or 3. I think it was 3 winters ago, where the Arctic oscillation was quite the opposite to what you're seeing there for your opening days of December. It was way above or way positive, and that was the year or the winter where it seemed like everything was bottled up, so to speak, up around the polar regions. That the cold air never did really penetrate very far south. But what you just showed, Joe, kind of suggests that we are going to see some kind of an outbreak of cold weather as we get into December.
This is the hemispheric 500, and you can see near Scandinavia where the strongest, we get to that big area of purple, the red and purple areas. Those are pressures that are well above normal up in that region. And at the moment, of course, this is for Thursday night. We've got a ridge in the east, and you see the trough in the west. There's your big negative PNA. But this block, this Scandinavian block, the ridge running from Ireland and England northeastward, and then up over into the Arctic region north of Norway and Sweden and Finland. That's going to gradually start pushing toward Greenland and even further south, possibly into eastern Canada. Initially, there's a movement out. There's another ridge out in the Atlantic that builds up into Greenland, and then still another ridge builds up there, and there it is. I mean, this is now Monday. You've got the highest pressures over Greenland and getting higher as we go through next week. There's a big high up there. There's got to be. And this is one of those maps, Joe, that you get these ridiculous pressures. And by the way, while that's happening, take a look at the deep trough out in the west. It sends a new system in on Sunday, and then gradually we start to see an upper low in Hudson Bay just kind of getting its place there and starting to shoot troughs around into the eastern part of the United States. This is a pretty cold look that evolves starting maybe later next week, but even more so a bit beyond that. This is a fairly cold look in the upper air, and there's some, it does some things here with upper lows in the eastern part of the United States. So the other thing is in the west, the west on this run, the trough is replaced by some ridging there up into western Canada, and the trough is now off the west coast. So this is actually a fairly like I said earlier, there's a lot to like here going forward. There's a lot to like here, and maybe even room for some things to happen when we get maybe, say, past the 10th of December.
Yeah, the game show that begins every year on December 1st and ends on the 28th of February for all of you fans of snow and cold weather. The game show is called The Game of Split and Blocks. And where the splits are going to occur and where the blockiness takes place, that will eventually be the deciders, so to speak, as to who's going to get what in terms of cold and in terms of storminess. And I agree with you, Joe. This certainly looks like a promising pattern, at least in terms of cold and maybe in terms of snow, depending upon where the trough's set up for any length of time. So I feel quite confident that we're going to see a wintry weather pattern before this is all. Because, you go through the winter and people just complain all winter long about how come it's not cold? How come we don't have any really, frigid air? Or how come we don't have the snow? We always are going to hear complaints like that, but maybe not so much this upcoming winter because, again, I'm highlighting in my mind. I think the winter month is going to be January, and I think we'll also have a secondary shot of winter in March. The last couple of seasons, March has been a relatively blah kind of month in terms of wintry weather, cold and especially snow. But I think we'll have a shot in January, then maybe a little bit of a let up, a winterlude, if you will, for February, and then a final comeback, a final surge in March. So an interesting pattern, an interesting winter, I think, ahead of us.
Here's another big split in the polar vortex too. The one upper low by the middle of next week is along the north coast of Siberia. Another upper low is sitting right in the middle of Hudson Bay. I mean, this will be the third split in the polar vortex that we've seen. And look at the dark brown across Siberia that's coming into Alaska. That's um, uh, another warm air intrusion there in the stratosphere. The polar vortex, to me, Joe, as long as it's if it's in this stretched look like this, where instead of consolidating like a tight wrapped up little ball, it just it's got more of that V shape dropping down from the center of the low at the end of the forecast period in northern Greenland with a trough that goes down almost to the Gulf. It just kind of dictates to me that your cold flow there is cross-polar here in the stratosphere, and as long as the vortex is not wrapped up like a tight little ball, but sort of elongated or stretching itself out or potentially splitting, when it does that, it's kind of telling you that at least in the longer range that this winter is going to be different from the past few that we've had.
And if you remember, as I said, the Arctic oscillation for much of the winter, I think 3 years ago or 3 winters ago, was well above the norm. We had a very strong positive Arctic oscillation. And when we were looking at the 10 millibar maps, if you remember, as I said, it seemed like all the cold air was capped right around the polar region, bottled up, if you will. And meanwhile, surrounding that area of blue near the poles, it was an almost concentric area of red or orange, like a donut, if you will. And that, again, was part of that positive AO. And you're right, Joe, when you see that the vortices are stretched out or they split, that opens the door for cold air to spill southward, either across Siberia or across North America. And it's a very promising sign. If you want cold weather, you're seeing that. The stratospheric warming, taking place over Siberia. But meantime, here in North America, the vortex is splitting or stretching, and that is allowing the cold air to try to spill southward, at least across Canada and maybe into the northern tier of the United States.
Yeah, I agree with you. And by the way, with everything that's going on, let me make this one point. There's nothing that says that it can't just be cold and dry. So, just even though there's a lot to like in as far as winter weather is concerned, if that's what you like, there's a lot to like in the evolving upper air pattern. There's also the possibility that you could wind up being cold and dry. So just bear that in mind. So in the meantime,
right, that was the winter of 72, 73, where Central Park had only about 3 inches of snow for the entire season. There were more than a few cases that winter. I mean, we had cold air. We had everything in place for cold, but the cold air was just a little bit too strong, and we had one storm after another storm after another storm passing to our south. So the Virginias, Washington, Delmarva area, they're getting hit with 3 to 5 or 5 to 7 inches of snow, and we're sitting here in New York. We've got the cold. We got nothing. We had nothing that winter. It was so frustrating. The block was there, but the block was just a little bit too strong. You don't want a little bit too much of a good thing, because sometimes you can end up in that particular pattern of cold. But if you're a snow lover, not all that much in the way of snow.
Correct. Steve LaPointe sent me a message here. He says, on the GFS 2-meter temperatures shaded has temperatures in the 40s out to the 15th. Well, it may very well be, but I'm going to tell you right now, if the block sets up anywhere resembling this, that is not going to be the case. And also bear in mind, the average high in the middle of December is still around 44, 45. So if it's showing 41 or 42, that is below normal. This is the thing about December is, if it's going to snow in December, December's one of those months where it just needs to be cold when the storm's there. It doesn't necessarily have to be cold before or after, just during. Okay, but nothing here. There's nothing that you're going to see in the coming days that you're going to be able to look at with any kind of certitude anyway. That's the other part of this is whenever we have setups that are blocky, particularly early in the winter and late in the winter, but just about even during the whole, almost all the time when we have blocking, that the models don't seem to handle blocking very well. Uh, they may have too much of it, they may have too little of it, or they may show too much and it winds up being far less. They may not. They may show less and it winds up being more. So expect run-to-run volatility. There's nothing here that you could point to and say, okay, this is the one, this is the date, this is when it's going to happen. So just bear that in mind. Don't people are going to go through emotional roller coasters now for the next 4 months because there's a storm on one run and it's gone on the next. The important thing is to get a grasp of what the pattern is, the overall upper air pattern, and then let things happen. Let things happen and watch things and how they evolve. That's how you figure out where this is all going to go. So we get a quick cold shot here for Thursday and Friday. I think, Joe, you and I are in agreement. You look at the weather here in much of the areas east of the Rockies, it's actually pretty quiet on Thursday. You start to get this next storm that's coming into the west tonight. And that continues to move into the Rockies over the next 2 nights. You get a low that runs quickly up from West Kansas to Lake Superior, and that's the light snows that are in the Dakotas and on up into Minnesota. That pushes the next cold front east. So Saturday could be, in a sense, a repeat performance of today with another weather front and some showers. The gradient is on the tightish side, Joe. I don't know if it's going to be the repeat, performance with the wind, but it might get a bit breezy. There's an 82 low south of James Bay with a strong high offshore. So, but to me, the gradient doesn't look quite as tight as what we went through today. And then that goes out. And then, of course, you got colder air that comes in behind it. And then some sort, it was trying to show another front for Monday. Now that looks like it's off the table. And then here comes something more important later next week. Now, it does have something trying to come out of the south for the middle part of next week into some cold air that's hanging around. There's a high that goes up in eastern Canada. So you got some snow being showed in northern Pennsylvania, western New York, and then eventually central and northern New England with a low developing offshore. And then more important, cold air comes in behind that one. And that would be probably around the 8th or the 9th. So it would suggest to me, Joe, after the 8th or the 9th, if this is the case, that's when you start to get into the more persistent cold. And if this block does hold, it is going to be persistently below normal if that verifies. And even from the 18Z and 12Z GFS that runs today, that's kind of what I got out of the guidance. In my view.
Yeah, we're still in this pattern where, and I mentioned this yesterday, where you get a couple of days of cold, and then just as quickly it moderates back into the 50s for a day or two, and then you go right back. It's an oscillating pattern between cold and mild. But small steps, Joe. I think again.
But once the block gets
right.
going, then that's when you could have. Where you don't get those that you don't get that day where it goes up into the 50s or the day or two.
Right.
Maybe you get up to seasonal, before the next front comes by.
And we will. As I said, it's going to be a gradual building of that or building toward that during December, and I think we'll be fully established once we get into January, and that's when we're going to have more than just a day or two of cold weather. We will have prolonged or protracted stretches of cold weather. And I honestly believe, especially by mid and late January, I think we can see some of the coldest weather we've seen around here in quite a few years. We've had a few winters where it's gotten cold, but not all that, nothing to write home about. But I think this upcoming winter, we're going to be back in those patterns where even in New York, you're going to be seeing temperatures drop into the single digits and maybe even get to 0 or below briefly for a short time. that's coming, I think, our way in January.
Some super chat hits tonight. Robert Russo. Thank you, Robert. Most appreciated. And thank you for your support. I chastised Robert Hill and he hit the tip jar. Thank you, Robert. I chastised Robert last night. Was it Robert I chastised last night?
Yes.
For no snow anymore. But I will just say happy holidays to you too, Robert. I appreciate it. And it's all in good fun, by the way. It's kind of fun to get me going every once in a while. And Leon Probitsky hitting a super chat also. So thank you all for your for hitting the tip jar and for your support. By the way, because I forgot yesterday and I meant to do it earlier in the show, but now I'm going to do it now. Just to mention, the chairman Scott Briller has been on sabbatical. He's taking care. He was not feeling well for a few days, non-COVID, and but he's much better. But his mom is also had not been feeling well, but she's also better. But he's been taking care of her, so he's been on hiatus. That's why we haven't been doing any Briller Jeopardy. So we wish him well. We hope Mother Briller is recovering nicely because she does watch the show. So give a big wave and a big hello to Mother Briller, and hope she gets better soon. So trying to think. I don't have when we do the show here. I have the TV off because I didn't want any distractions. So I don't know what's going on with the tree lighting. I don't watch it. I'm assuming that the weather there is fine.
They've turned it into a, as I said, growing up, you and I in the Bronx, we used to watch on Channel 4, and sometime during the 6 o'clock news, and it wasn't even this early, Joe. I mean, I was talking to my sister earlier today. Her birthday is December the 8th, and I reminded her that on her 21st birthday, that was the night when they lit the tree at Rockefeller Center. That was December the 8th. They now are doing it 6 days after Thanksgiving. The 6 days after the parade, they now officially light the tree on a Wednesday evening. And here in New York, they have local coverage for 1 hour between 7 and 8 o'clock on Channel 4. And then I think this is a national thing.
Yeah, it
From
is.
8 o'clock to 10 o'clock, the lighting of the Rockefeller Center tree from coast to coast on the NBC network. And they let you wait. Boy, do they let you wait. The show runs from 8 to 10. I think it's at 9:59:30. They finally flick the switch, and you finally, at the very end of the show, see the lights come on and see everything, and everybody's applauding and singing and whatever. But they really hang you out to dry until virtually the end to keep you on, to hold you to your TV watching, to make sure that you don't change the dial as you come up close to the 10 o'clock hour Eastern time or local time to see the thing.
No, I was going to say Cecilia Hernandez says, "How come I don't watch the show?" I'm just not I'm not a big TV watcher, so I just don't do it.
Well, Cecilia Hernandez did make a reference, and I put this up late last night on my Facebook page. And if anybody, you go to Facebook, Joe Rayo Weather, I posted this last night. He said, "Senor Rayo, enjoy the Facebook classic Coke." And Joe, I don't know if you had a chance to see this. I remember it with great fondness. In 1989, the late, great Art Carney did a commercial for Coke where he's walking his grandson through the streets of New York. They go up to 30 Rockefeller Plaza. They go up to the spot where the tree will be located, and they start dropping things like grandma's fruitcake and the magic acorn. He drops the magic acorn down and covers it up, and then he tells his grandson, "Okay, we come back in 2 weeks." And in 2 weeks, they come back, and he said, "It's just about that time." And at that moment, they light up the tree. All of a sudden, there's the tree at Rockefeller Center lit up, and the kids, the look on the kids' faces like amazing. And there's Art Carney drinking his Coca-Cola. And I think the thing that makes that a great commercial, if on several reasons, is number one, it's Art Carney. Number two, it does not give you the impression that it may not also be Ed Norton. And you like to think that maybe Ed and Trixie down the road had a child, and the child had a grandson or whatever, and you like to think that that's Ed Norton showing his grandson the tree at Rockefeller Center. Anyway, it's a great commercial. I remember it with fondness. I found it on YouTube. I said, "Oh, I got to post this," and especially today since they're lighting the tree. And so, if you want to go to my Facebook page and go down memory lane, it's a 1-minute commercial for Coke, but really it's not for Coke. I mean, you see every 2 or 3 times during the commercial, you see Art Carney swigging some Coke out of a can. But more than that, it's the Christmas season. It's him telling the kid that grandma's fruitcake and the magic acorn is going to cause this big tree to suddenly appear and get lit up in 2 weeks in the middle of Midtown Manhattan. A wonderful commercial. And thank you, Cecilia Hernandez, for making reference to that. That 1989. That's 33 years ago, Joe. It seems to me like it was only a few years ago that I saw that commercial. 33 years ago with Art Carney.
Cecilia says many enjoy the tree, and we make visits to see the tree, and it is nice. Don't get me wrong, it is nice, but I will tell you this, because I worked at NBC in the early '80s, and also for 2 years, and so I had two Christmases there. Or 3, possibly it was 3.
Did they invite you to step outside in front of the tree and sing the carols?
But the thing was, no, they didn't do that. And then I worked there also I freelanced there for about a year, a little over a year in 2007 and 2008. And I remember distinctly being told by so many people that worked there, because it's right in the heart of 30 Rockefeller Plaza, it is so difficult to almost impossible to get around, that coming to work and going home from work were just a nightmare. So, yeah. But actually going home was actually okay for me, because when I finished the show, it was usually close to midnight. So I would go out, and there are people there, but at least you could get around. There wasn't a lot of people around at midnight, but the rest of the time coming to, I used to have to park, Joe, on 42nd, and I used to park my truck at 42nd and 2nd, and then walk from 42nd and 2nd to 50th and 6th, okay, which is not a long walk, but it's not around the corner either, right. And it's in the winter time, so it's cold, and I enjoyed having to do the walk. Then I'd have to walk back at night after I got out to get back to my car. But the point is, it took almost forever to walk, let alone drive. If I wanted to drive in there and park, in a parking lot nearby, it just wasn't going to happen. So it just made things a little bit difficult. But yeah, it is nice, and I get that. To me, I don't watch. That's not the sort of thing that I watch. I am going to watch what I've been watching the last few nights. So I'm up to the 3rd episode now I'm watching on Netflix, Joe, a show called Wednesday.
Is that anything to do with the Addams Family?
Yes.
Wednesday?
Yes.
I think I heard about this.
Yes. It's okay. It's not going to win any awards. And Catherine Zeta-Jones plays Morticia. She was there in the first episode, but wasn't there in the second episode, because it really centers around the character Wednesday. And don't
you find that a little weird though? It was the original Morticia was Carolyn Jones, and now the new Morticia is Catherine Zeta-Jones.
Right. Yeah, it's just kind of interesting how they're developing this character. So yeah, I watch that. I watch Yellowstone, and then the rest of the time, I really don't watch much of anything. So I'm just not a TV person anymore. But,
and let's wish, by the way, Al Roker, who is in the hospital. He's been having treatment. I forget exactly what it was for, but he's been in the hospital now for a couple of weeks. He missed the Thanksgiving Day parade for the first time in many, many years last Thursday, and he's not there tonight for the lighting of the tree. And it seems in a way a part of the tree lighting is missing without good old Al. So well, here's the best to him, and hopefully he will make a quick recovery. But he's in the hospital right now, Joe, for some sort of a treatment.
Oh, we wish him well.
Yes.
And a quick and speedy recovery. All right. On that note, let us put an end to tonight's show. Thanks for the tip jar hits, everybody. And Joe and I will be back tomorrow night, where I'm sure some things in the long range will be the same, and I'm sure some things will be different. So we'll deal with it when we get there. Have a great night, Joe. Have a great night. We'll see you tomorrow, 7:35 Eastern Time. Ding,
We'll
ding,
be
ding.
here.
Bye.
Bye-bye.